Capitalism is just out in paperback. It's being translated now into 25 languages. And by the way, she's speaking here in New York at Barnes & Noble Union Square tomorrow night at 7 p.m. We're talking oil, Naomi. How is it that the oil prices are, well, among the highest they have ever been, and yet so are the oil company profits? ExxonMobil, Chevron. Why?
Well, they have a captive market, and the fact that the price is high means that they're earning more profit.
But supposedly the price is high because it's harder to get, not to give them more money.
There's a speculative bubble going on right now, and this market is being flayed. I mean, I think this is really the new bubble, actually. It's replacing the housing bubble. And, you know, anytime anything bad happens in the world, that's the indication for speculators to drive the price up. It happened yesterday. Bush announced that he would be opening up to offshore oil drilling, but at the same time there was an oil strike in Brazil, so the price of oil went up. So everything drives the price of oil up. I think it's really a classic bubble. Certainly there are some supply issues, but I actually don't think that is the main reason why the price of oil is going up.
You're from Canada. Talk about Canada being the major supplier of oil to the United States.
Yeah.
I think most people in this country would not understand this, and I also want to talk about ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge.
Well, it's really striking because in all of these discussions, and we heard this just now from President Bush, it was we need to drill it offshore to get away from our dependence on foreign oil. And there is still an overwhelming perception that most of the oil in the United States is coming from countries like Saudi Arabia. There has been, since the invasion of Iraq, and this is the period where the price of oil has skyrocketed, this has already changed. The number one supplier of oil to the United States is not Saudi Arabia, it's not Mexico, it's Canada. And it has all of the elements that these new initiatives that are being proposed, offshore, ANWR, shale, possess. It's close. It is an absolutely secure source of oil for the United States, and the reason for that is because locked into the North American Free Trade Agreement, locked into NAFTA, is a clause that we Canadians are really not very pleased with, which actually makes it illegal, impossible under NAFTA for Canada to turn off the tap, even if we face an oil crisis and are not able to supply oil for our citizens. We have to keep supplying the United States. So it's a legally binding agreement that this tap will stay open. So Canada is now the number one supplier. And the other thing that it holds in common is that it's ecologically devastating what's going on in Canada, because the majority of this new oil coming to the United States is coming from the Alberta tar sands, which are often called the oil sands. We call them the tar sands because it's a more accurate description, and this is another oil industry talking point to get you to stop calling it the tar sands and start calling it the oil sands. But essentially the oil in Alberta is very linked to the high price of oil, which is to say that when oil was at $30 a barrel, the tar sands, this huge oil deposit, was not counted as part of the global oil reserves. And the reason for that is that it was so expensive to process this very, very thick tar-like substance into liquid oil. It cost between $25 and $30 a barrel. So it just didn't make sense to count it as part of the global oil reserves, because who was going to make the investment required if they were obviously not going to get a return on their investment? So once the Iraq War started and the price of oil started skyrocketing, oil was discovered in Canada. Everyone knew it was there, but it became part of the global oil reserves. And more than that, it is now counted as the largest oil deposit in the world. These are the tar sands. And you know, I would argue that that this oil should be left in the ground. Environmentalists are calling for a moratorium on the tar sands because it takes 3 times the amount of fossil fuels, of burning fossil fuels, to process 1 barrel of oil from the tar sands as it does to process the kind of oil that they have in Iraq, for instance, which is already in liquid form.
So you dramatically increase emissions.
Well, it's why Canada has become a climate renegade along with the United States, because our emissions are increasing because of the tar sands, because it is so carbon intensive and water intensive, which is another issue, to do this very, very dirty processing of this tar-like substance into liquid form. So the argument is that it should actually be left alone. But the other argument that we see is that even with this huge boom going on in Canada, and this is the reason why our economy is actually doing better than the U.S. economy because of the tar sands, is that it in no way has affected the price of oil. So here you have a paradigm to look at of what is being proposed right now with ANWR, what's being proposed with offshore, what's being proposed with shale. We can see it right now in Canada, and as this huge boom is taking place, the price of oil has gone up month after month after month. It has had absolutely no effect on the price at the pump.
We're talking to Naomi Klein. Naomi, you've been writing a lot on a number of issues. One of them is about what you call Obama's boys.
Obama's Chicago boys, yeah. I just want to add one more point, and I just want to take this opportunity because I feel like people are being so bombarded with these oil industry talking points, and it really is changing public opinion. I mean, people need to know this. Polls are being commissioned that are finding that 67% of Americans support offshore oil drilling because they think it's going to lower the price at the pump. What's actually going on is the oil companies may not even bother drilling. What they're doing is they're stockpiling leases. And what that means is that the oil companies will have a much greater control over the oil supply. When the oil companies have a much larger control over the oil supply, they can turn it on and off. They can control price. They can fix the price. So in fact, what this is doing is the opposite of what they're saying. It's actually giving the oil industry much more power to drive the price of oil up by controlling supply, by just giving them all of these leases. And we keep hearing, well, they have all these leases already and they're not using them and they want more. Why? Why do they want